when 9-year-old Natalie Cox approached the $15 million helicopter with hydraulic fluid pooling beneath its belly like dark blood. The 3 professional mechanics barely glanced her way. Lawrence Butler, billionaire tech mogul, was too busy, screaming into his phone about a collapsed billion-dollar merger, to notice the small girl studying his grounded aircraft with the intensity of a surgeon examining a patient. But when she quietly announced that the secondary hydraulic pump was cavitating due to metal contamination in the filtration system, using technical language that would impress MIT engineers, the entire hangar fell silent. 4 hours of expert diagnostics had failed to identify what this child pinpointed in 30 seconds. Yet the real shock came when Lawrence finally looked down and saw the military dog tags hanging from her neck, tags that bore a name burned into his memory from the worst day of his life: Captain Gregory Cox, the army medic who died saving him in Afghanistan. Before we jump back in, tell me, where are you watching this video from below? And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's episode is extra special. The silence stretched like a taut wire through Butler Aviation's pristine hangar, broken only by the distant hum of air conditioning and the soft drip of hydraulic fluid hitting concrete. The mechanics, Tony Reeves, Maria Santos and Jake Morrison, stood frozen in place, their tools forgotten in their hands as they stared at the small girl who had just accomplished what their combined 60 years of experience could not. Lawrence's phone slipped from his fingers, clattering across the polished floor with a sound that seemed to echo forever in the vast space. His face had gone pale, and his hands trembled slightly as he took a step closer to Natalie, his eyes fixed on the worn metal tags that caught the overhead lighting with each breath she took. "Those tags," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Where did you get those tags?" Natalie's hand moved instinctively to her throat, fingers wrapping around the warm metal that had never left her neck since the day the army chaplain had placed them there 3 years ago. She looked up at the tall man in the expensive suit, noting the way his complexion had shifted from angry red to ashen gray, the way his breathing had become shallow and rapid. "They were my father's," she said simply. "Captain Gregory Cox. He died in Afghanistan when I was 6. The words hit Lawrence like a physical blow, sending him staggering backward until he found support against a nearby workbench. The memories came flooding back with devastating clarity. The searing heat of the Afghan desert, the acrid smell of smoke and cordite, the sound of mortars whistling overhead. But most vividly, he remembered the steady hands and calm voice of the young army medic who had refused to let him die. Tony was the first to break the spell, clearing his throat and approaching Natalie with a mixture of curiosity and professional respect. "Kid, I've been working on aircraft for 23 years, and I've never heard anyone your age use the term cavitation correctly, let alone diagnose it in a complex hydraulic system. How do you know all this?" Natalie shrugged, a gesture that seemed to carry the weight of loss and resilience far beyond her 9 years. "My dad taught me. Before he deployed, he used to bring me to the motor pool on base. He said understanding machines was like understanding people. You had to listen to what they were trying to tell you, pay attention to the signs they couldn't hide." She walked closer to the grounded Sikorsky, her small sneakers silent on the concrete as she pointed to specific areas beneath the aircraft. "See how the fluid pattern isn't uniform. A standard seal failure would create a consistent drip pattern, but this is irregular, almost foamy in places. That's your cavitation signature. The metal particles in your filtration system are too small for your primary screens, but large enough to create microscopic vortices in the secondary pump chamber." Maria Santos, who held a master's degree in aerospace engineering, found herself nodding along with the child's explanation, her tablet forgotten in her hands. But how did you identify the contamination source so quickly? We ran full spectral analysis on the fluid samples. You tested the fluid that had already passed through the contaminated system, Natalie replied matter-of-factly. The particles would have been ground down even smaller by the pump mechanism. You need to test the fluid upstream before it enters the secondary circuit. The contamination signature will be clearer there. Jake Morrison set down his wrench with deliberate care, his nervous energy replaced by something approaching awe. This is impossible. I mean, no offense, kid, but you're 9 years old. Where did you learn about upstream contamination analysis? Natalie's expression grew distant, her dark eyes focusing on something beyond the hangar walls. Dad used to say that every machine tells a story if you know how to read it. He taught me to see the whole system, not just the broken part. He said that in the field, when lives depended on getting things right the first time, you couldn't afford to treat symptoms. You had to find the root cause. Lawrence pushed himself away from the workbench, his legs unsteady as he approached. The girl who carried his dead friend's name around her neck. Up close, he could see the resemblance, the same determined set to her jaw that Greg had possessed, the same intelligent eyes that seemed to see straight through to the heart of any problem. Your father, Lawrence said, his voice thick with emotion. He saved my life 15 years ago, outside Kandahar. I was CEO of a tech startup then, doing a goodwill visit to see some communications equipment we'd donated. Our convoy hit an IED, and then we were pinned down by insurgent fire for 3 hours. Natalie looked up at him with those dark, penetrating eyes. He never talked much about Afghanistan, just said he helped people who were hurt. He did more than help, Lawrence continued, the words coming in a rush now, as if a dam had burst inside him. I was bleeding out, had shrapnel in my leg and abdomen. Greg dragged me to cover, worked on me for hours while bullets were flying overhead. He kept talking to me, keeping me conscious, making me promise I wouldn't give up. The hangar had become completely still, the three mechanics forming an unconscious circle around Lawrence and Natalie as the billionaire's carefully controlled facade crumbled. Tony noticed tears tracking down the man's face, and for the first time in 20 years of working for demanding clients, he felt a surge of genuine sympathy for one of them. When the rescue helicopter finally came, Lawrence continued, Greg made sure I was loaded first. He said I had important work to do, that I was going to change the world someday. He turned back to help another wounded soldier. And then, Lawrence's voice broke completely. A mortar round hit 20 feet away. The medic who saved my life was gone in an instant. Natalie reached up and touched the dog tags at her throat, her fingers tracing the raised letters of her father's name. He always said his job was to bring people home, all of them if he could. He brought me home, Lawrence whispered. And I built an empire because of the life he gave me, but I never got to thank him. I never got to tell him what his sacrifice meant. You can tell me, Natalie said quietly. He would want to know that the person he saved did something good with the life he gave them. Lawrence knelt down, so he was at eye level with the small girl. This unexpected ghost from his past, who had walked into his hangar and turned his world upside down. What happened to you after he died? Where do you live? Natalie's expression grew guarded, the wariness of a child who had learned not to trust easily settling over her features. Foster care, different families. I don't really have a permanent home. The words hit Lawrence like another physical blow. The daughter of the man who had saved his life was alone in the world, bouncing between temporary families while he lived, in a $50 million mansion. The injustice of it was staggering, the cosmic cruelty almost unbearable. The helicopter, Tony interjected gently, sensing that the emotional weight of the moment was threatening to overwhelm both Lawrence and Natalie. The kid's diagnosis, should we verify it? Lawrence wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, struggling to regain his composure. Yes, of course. Natalie, would you be willing to show us exactly what you found? For the next hour, Natalie guided the three professional mechanics through a diagnostic process that revealed the depth and precision of her mechanical intuition. She pointed out subtle pressure variations that their instruments had missed, identified wear patterns that told the story of gradual contamination, and explained the cascade of failures that had led to the mysterious hydraulic leak. Every prediction she made proved accurate. Every solution she suggested worked flawlessly. By the time they had located and addressed the root cause of the problem, the three mechanics were looking at her with something approaching reverence. 6 hours, Maria announced, checking her tablet as the final diagnostic tests completed. Just like she said, the aircraft will be fully airworthy in 6 hours. Lawrence stood beside his restored helicopter, watching Natalie carefully return, each tool to its proper place in Jake's mobile cart. The precision of her movements, the way she handled each instrument with respect and familiarity, reminded him so powerfully of her father that it took his breath away. "Natalie," he said finally, "I have a proposition for you." "Natalie," Lawrence said finally, "I have a proposition for you." The small girl looked up from Jake's tool cart, where she had been methodically returning each wrench to its designated slot with the same precision her father had once used to organize his medical kit. Her dark eyes held a wariness that spoke of too many broken promises from well-meaning adults. "What kind of proposition?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. Lawrence glanced at the three mechanics who had been watching this extraordinary reunion unfold with mixture of professional curiosity and human compassion. Tony nodded encouragingly, while Maria and Jake stepped back to give them privacy, while remaining close enough to hear. "I owe your father a debt I can never fully repay," Lawrence began, his voice steadier now, but still thick with emotion. "He gave me my life, and everything I've built since that day in Afghanistan exists because of his sacrifice. But more than that—" He paused, struggling to find words adequate to the moment. "He believed I would do something meaningful with the life he saved. I've spent 15 years trying to honor that belief." Natalie remained silent, her small hands still resting on the handle of a torque wrench that was nearly as long as her. "Inforam, I want you to come live with me," Lawrence continued, "not as charity, not out of pity, but because you're family. You're the daughter of the man who was more of a brother to me than my own blood relatives. Your father's courage runs in your veins, and his genius clearly does too." "I don't need charity," Natalie replied quietly, but without anger. "And I don't know you." "You're right on both counts," Lawrence acknowledged. "It wouldn't be charity, it would be family taking care of family. And you're absolutely right that you don't know me. But I'd like you to get to know me, and I'd like to know you. Your father told me during those 3 hours we were pinned down that the most important thing in his life was making sure his daughter grew up to be everything she was capable of becoming." Tony stepped forward, his weathered hands still stained with hydraulic fluid. "Kid, I don't know what your situation is in foster care, but what you did here today, that wasn't luck. That was pure talent, the kind of talent that could take you anywhere you want to go in life. The kind of talent that needs the right opportunities to flourish," Maria added. "I've got a master's degree in aerospace engineering, and you just schooled me in hydraulics. With the right education, the right resources, I could set up a trust fund," Lawrence said quickly. "Full college tuition, graduate school if you want it, whatever you need to pursue your interests. But more than that, I want to give you a real home, stability, the chance to be a kid while also nurturing this incredible gift you have." Natalie finally looked up from the tool cart, her gaze moving from Lawrence to each of the mechanics in turn. "What if it doesn't work out? What if you decide you don't want a foster kid around anymore? I've been through that before." The question hit Lawrence like a physical blow. The idea that this remarkable child, Greg's daughter, had been shuttled between families like an unwanted burden was almost unbearable. "It will work out," he said firmly. "Not because I'm rich, or because I can solve problems with money, but because your father saved my life, and taking care of his daughter isn't an obligation. It's an honor. Besides," Jake interjected with a grin, "if it doesn't work out, you can always come back here and show us up some more." Tony's ego could use the regular humbling. Despite herself, Natalie's lips twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "I do like working on machines. They make sense. They don't lie or change their minds or decide they don't want you anymore. People can be more complicated than machines," Lawrence admitted. "But the best people, like your father, they're constant, reliable. They don't abandon the people they care about." Natalie was quiet for a long moment, her fingers unconsciously moving to the dog tags at her throat. "What would happen to my current foster family? The Hendersons are okay. They don't really understand me, but they're not mean. We'd handle everything properly, through the courts and child services," Lawrence assured her. "No one would be hurt or left in a difficult position. But Natalie, I need you to understand, this isn't just about me trying to repay a debt. When I watched you diagnose that hydraulic problem, when I heard you explain complex engineering concepts with the kind of intuitive understanding that can't be taught, I saw your father in you. But I also saw something uniquely yours, something extraordinary." "What kind of life are we talking about?" Natalie asked, her practical nature asserting itself. "I mean, specifically, where would I live? What would I do? I don't know how to be rich." Lawrence laughed, surprising himself with a genuine sound. "You don't need to know how to be rich. You just need to know how to be yourself. I have a house in Marin County. It's big, but it's also quiet. There's a workshop in the garage that hasn't been used in years. I was thinking maybe we could set it up as a proper mechanical workspace, somewhere you could tinker and experiment and learn. You'd let me work on real machines. I'd insist on it, but safely, with proper supervision and training. I know some people at MIT, at Stanford, at several aerospace companies, people who could mentor you, teach you things that would challenge even your remarkable mind." Natalie walked slowly around the helicopter one more time, her eyes taking in every detail of the repair work they had completed based on her diagnosis. The aircraft that had been grounded and bleeding was now whole again, ready to carry its passengers safely through the sky. "My dad used to say that fixing things was about more than just making them work again," she said finally. "He said it was about understanding why they broke in the first place, so you could prevent it from happening again." "That's very wise," Lawrence said. "I think maybe some people are like machines that way too," Natalie continued, her young voice carrying unexpected depth. "Maybe you've been broken since Afghanistan, and maybe I've been broken since Dad died. Maybe we can help fix each other." The simple profundity of her observation left Lawrence speechless. This child had not only inherited her father's mechanical genius, but also his ability to see straight to the heart of complex problems, whether mechanical or human. "Is that a yes?" he asked quietly. Natalie nodded slowly. "It's a yes, but I have conditions." "Name them. I want to come back here sometimes, to work with Tony and Maria and Jake. They know things I need to learn, and I like the way they teach." "Done," Lawrence said immediately, glancing at the mechanics, who were all nodding enthusiastically. "And I want to keep Dad's dog tags, always. Of course, they're part of who you are. And I want to write letters to Mrs. Henderson, my foster mom. She worries about kids, even after they leave. I don't want her to think something bad happened to me." Lawrence felt his throat tighten with emotion at this display of compassion from a child who had every reason to be bitter about the world. "We'll make sure she knows you're safe and happy. We'll visit her if you want." "Okay then," Natalie said, extending her small hand for a formal handshake. "I guess we have a deal, Mr. Butler." Lawrence took her hand in both of his, marveling at the strength in those small fingers that had just solved a problem that had stumped 3 professionals. "Welcome home, Natalie Cox. And please, call me Lawrence. Or better yet, call me Uncle. Lawrence, that's what your father would have wanted." As they shook hands in the shadow of the restored helicopter, with hydraulic fluid still staining the concrete beneath their feet and the afternoon sun streaming through the hangar doors, neither of them could have imagined how this moment would reshape both their lives. But somewhere in the space between Lawrence's grief and Natalie's loneliness, between a debt that could never be fully paid and a gift that had never been properly received, something new and healing had begun to take root. The mechanics watched, with satisfied smiles, as the billionaire and the orphan began planning their unconventional future together, 2 broken pieces of the same tragedy, finally finding a way to make each other whole. 3 weeks later, Natalie Cox stood in the doorway of what Lawrence had called the workshop, with the same analytical intensity she had brought to the helicopter diagnosis. The space was larger than some of the apartments she had lived in during her years in foster care, a converted 3-car garage with pristine white walls, polished concrete floors, and enough electrical outlets to power a small factory. But it was completely empty, except for dust motes dancing in the afternoon sunlight that streamed through skylights Lawrence had installed the week before. "It's very clean," she observed, running her finger along a windowsill and finding no trace of the grime that accumulated in real workshops. Too clean, Lawrence, who had been anxiously awaiting her verdict, felt his shoulders sag slightly. "I thought you'd like having a fresh start, somewhere that was completely yours to organize however you wanted." "Dad always said you could tell if someone was a real mechanic by looking at their hands," Natalie replied, holding up her own small palms. "The grease never completely comes out. It gets into the lines of your skin, under your nails, becomes part of who you are. This place doesn't have any stories yet." She walked to the center of the empty space and slowly turned in a full circle, her dark eyes cataloging every detail. "But I guess that means we get to write the first stories here." Lawrence exhaled in relief. Over the past 3 weeks, as they had navigated the complex legal process of changing Natalie's guardianship, he had discovered that she had very specific opinions about most things and wasn't shy about expressing them. The house had been too big, too quiet, too full of expensive things that couldn't be touched. The bedroom he had prepared for her had been too fancy, too far from the kitchen, too much like a hotel room. Each criticism had been delivered matter-of-factly, without malice. But Lawrence had begun to worry that nothing he could provide would feel right to her. "So, what do you think we need?" he asked, pulling out his phone to start a notes list. "A proper workbench," Natalie said immediately. "Not one of those clean metal ones from a catalogue. A real wooden bench that's been used enough to have character, and good lighting, the kind that doesn't leave shadows when you're working on small parts." She walked over to what had been the garage's main bay door, now converted into a wall of windows. "Tool storage here, organized by function, not by size. Most people organize their tools wrong. They think about how they look instead of how they work. What else? A parts washer, safety equipment, eye protection, fire extinguisher, first aid kit. Dad always said the most important tool in any shop was the first aid kit, because it meant you were planning to learn from your mistakes instead of just making them." Lawrence typed rapidly, trying to capture her specific requirements. "Anything else?" Natalie was quiet for a moment, her gaze focused on something beyond the workshop. Walls, music. Dad always had music playing when he worked, said it helped him think through problems, but not too loud. You need to be able to hear what the machines are telling you. Over the next hour, she walked through every corner of the space, explaining her vision with the same methodical precision she had brought to diagnosing the helicopter. Lawrence found himself not just taking notes, but genuinely learning about workshop design from a 9-year-old who understood the relationship between tools and craftsmanship better than most adults. "The bench needs to be the right height," she explained, standing next to the wall where she envisioned it. "Too high, and you can't get proper leverage. Too low, and you'll hurt your back. Dad used to say that your workspace should fit your body like a well-made tool fits your hand." "How do we figure out the right height?" "Easy. You measure from the floor to just below my elbow when my arm is bent at 90 degrees. Then you add 2 inches to account for how much I'll grow in the next year or 2. We can always adjust the leg height later." Lawrence found himself smiling at her practical approach to planning for her own growth. "You've really thought this through. I've had a lot of time to think about what I'd want in a workshop. Foster families don't usually let you work on engines in their garages." The T said casual reference to her previous living situations sent a familiar pang through Lawrence's chest. He was still learning to navigate the casual way she referenced experiences that would have been traumatic for most children, the matter-of-fact acceptance of instability that had shaped her young life. "Well," he said, "this is your garage now. Your workshop, and if you want to work on engines, we'll work on engines. Really, you'd let me tear apart an actual engine? I'd insist on it with proper supervision. In fact, I have an idea about that." Lawrence pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. "There's someone I'd like you to meet. Someone who knew your father." Natalie's expression grew alert. "Who?" "Sergeant First Class Marcus Williams. He was the crew chief on the medevac helicopter that pulled us out of that firefight. He lives about an hour from here now, runs a vintage aircraft restoration business. He's been wanting to meet you since I told him about finding you. He knew Dad. Not well, but they worked together that day. Marcus was the one who helped load you father onto the helicopter after—" Lawrence's voice trailed off, but Natalie nodded understanding. "I'd like to meet him." "Good, because I was thinking, if you're serious about learning engine repair, Marcus has a hangar full of vintage aircraft engines that need restoration. Radial engines, inline engines, rotary engines from the 1940s and 50s. He's been looking for an apprentice, someone young enough to learn his techniques before he retires." Natalie's eyes lit up with genuine excitement, for the first time since Lawrence had known her. Real aircraft engines. Not just car engines. Real aircraft engines. Some of them are completely disassembled, just boxes of parts waiting for someone, with the patience and skill to put them back together. Marcus says it's like 3-dimensional mechanical puzzles, except when you solve them correctly, they produce 500 horsepower and the most beautiful sound in the world. When can we go? Tomorrow, if you want, but first we need to get this workshop set up properly. Marcus has very specific ideas about how tools should be organized and maintained. He says he can tell everything he needs to know about a mechanic by looking at their workspace. They spent the rest of the afternoon creating detailed plans for the workshop, with Natalie sketching layouts on graph paper while Lawrence researched suppliers and contractors. By evening, they had a comprehensive blueprint for transforming the empty garage into a proper mechanical workspace. "There's one more thing," Natalie said, as they prepared to head back to the house for dinner. "Something I haven't told you about the helicopter diagnosis." Lawrence looked at her with curiosity. "What's that?" "I didn't just figure out what was wrong by looking at the fluid patterns. I could hear it too. The cavitation makes a very specific sound, like a whisper inside the hydraulic lines. Most people can't hear it because they're not listening for it, but Dad taught me to listen to machines the same way doctors listen to heartbeats." "You could hear the helicopter's problem?" "All machines have voices, if you know how to listen." Cars, aircraft, even simple tools. They tell you when they're happy, when they're stressed, when something's wrong. It's not magic or anything mystical, it's just physics. Sound waves, vibration frequencies, the way different materials respond to stress. Lawrence stared at her, beginning to understand that her mechanical abilities went far beyond simple technical knowledge. That's not something that can be taught. In school, no, it's not. Dad said it was something you either had or you didn't, like perfect pitch for musicians. He said I had it, but I needed to learn to trust what I was hearing. And you trust it now? Natalie nodded. The helicopter in your hangar, it's completely healthy now. All the sounds are right. But there's something else I've been hearing since I came to live with you. What? Your car, the Mercedes. There's something wrong with the transmission. It's very subtle, just a slight harmonic distortion when it shifts into third gear. It's not dangerous yet, but it will be if you don't address it soon. Lawrence thought about his morning commute, trying to remember if he had noticed anything unusual about his car's performance. I haven't felt anything wrong with it. You will in about 2 weeks, maybe 3. The early symptoms are always auditory before they become mechanical. Dad used to say that machines always tell you what they need. The trick is learning their language. As they walked back toward the house, Lawrence found himself listening more carefully to the sounds around him. The hum of the garage door opener, the subtle whir of the air conditioning system, the distant drone of traffic on the highway. For the first time, he began to understand that Natalie lived in a world filled with mechanical voices that spoke to her in ways he was only beginning to comprehend. Tomorrow, he said, we'll go meet Marcus Williams, and we'll start learning what your father's gift really means. Natalie smiled, a real smile this time, not the careful expression she had worn for the past 3 weeks. I'd like that. I think Dad would like that too. As they reached the house, Lawrence realized that somewhere in the space between workshop, plans and engine diagnostics, between memories of Afghanistan and dreams of the future, he and Natalie had begun to build something that neither of them had expected, a family. The drive to Marcus Williams' aircraft restoration facility took them through the rolling hills of Northern California, past vineyards and horse farms, until they reached a small private airfield where 3 weathered hangars stood like monuments to aviation history. As Lawrence parked his Mercedes, which had indeed begun showing the transmission symptoms Natalie had predicted, she pressed her face to the window and stared at the collection of vintage aircraft scattered around the tarmac. "Is that a P-51 Mustang?" she asked, her voice filled with excitement. "2 of them, actually," Lawrence replied. "Marcus specializes in World War II fighters, though he works on civilian aircraft too. He's been restoring warbirds for 30 years. They walked across the tarmac toward the largest hangar, where the sound of compressed air tools and classic rock music drifted through the partially open doors. Natalie moved with the careful attention of someone cataloging every detail, the way the afternoon light played across polished aluminum, the subtle differences in propeller designs, the various stages of restoration represented by different aircraft. "You can hear them," she said suddenly, stopping beside a partially disassembled Corsair fighter. "Even when they're not running, they're still talking." Lawrence paused beside her, trying to understand what she meant. To him, the aircraft looked like an elaborate collection of parts waiting to be reassembled. But Natalie walked slowly around the fighter, her head tilted as if listening to something only she could perceive. "The engine's been recently rebuilt," she observed. "Whoever did the work knows what they're doing. All the harmonics are balanced, no stress points, no shortcuts. But the hydraulic system for the landing gear needs attention. There's a pressure leak somewhere in the retraction mechanism." "How can you possibly know that just by looking?" "I'm not just looking," Natalie replied. "I'm listening. The metal remembers stress, and stress has a sound. Dad taught me that aluminum and steel have different voices, and when they're happy or unhappy, they sing different songs." A gruff voice called out from the hangar entrance. "Well, I'll be damned. You must be Natalie Cox." They turned to see a man in his early 60s approaching them, his weathered hands still holding a torque wrench. Marcus Williams was shorter than Lawrence had expected, with grey hair pulled back in a ponytail and the kind of deep tan that came from decades of working outdoors. But it was his eyes that caught Natalie's attention, the same steady, competent gaze she remembered from her father's face. "Sergeant Williams?" she asked formally. "Just Marcus now, kiddo. I left the army rank behind a long time ago." He extended his hand for a handshake, noting the firmness of her grip. "Your father was a hell of a man. Finest medic I ever had the privilege to work with." "You helped get him to the helicopter that day," Natalie said. It wasn't a question. Marcus's expression grew solemn. "I helped get him to the bird, yes, but he wasn't thinking about himself. Even wounded, even knowing he was hurt bad, he was still trying to help other people. Made me promise to take care of the wounded first, said he could wait." That sounds like Dad. "He talked about you, you know, during the flight to the field hospital. Kept saying he had to get home to his little girl, that you were going to be something special, said you had a gift with machines that reminded him of his grandfather." Natalie's hand moved unconsciously to her father's dog tags. "He never told me about a grandfather who was a mechanic. According to your dad, his grandfather was a flight engineer on B-17 bombers during World War II. Could diagnose engine problems by the sound they made from inside the aircraft, even over the noise of combat. Your father said that gift had skipped a generation, but showed up strong in you." Lawrence felt a chill run down his spine as another piece of Natalie's extraordinary abilities fell into place. Her talent wasn't just learned, it was inherited, passed down through generations of people who could hear the secret language of machines. "Anyway," Marcus continued, "Lawrence here tells me you're interested in learning about aircraft engines. Is that right?" "Very interested," Natalie replied. "Lawrence said you might let me work on some restoration projects." Marcus grinned. "Well, let's see what you're made of first. Come on inside, I've got something that might interest you." The interior of the hangar was a symphony of organized chaos. Aircraft in various stages of restoration occupied the main floor space, while the walls were lined with engine stands, parts bins, and tool cabinets that had clearly been accumulated. Over decades, the air smelled of aviation fuel, metal polish, and the distinctive scent of high-temperature lubricants. But it was the sound that caught Natalie's attention, a subtle harmony of mechanical voices that most people would dismiss as ambient noise. Compressed air hissing through pneumatic tools, the gentle whir of ventilation fans, the tick and pop of cooling metal, the almost inaudible vibration of electrical systems. To her ears it was like walking into a vast mechanical orchestra. "Over here!" Marcus called, leading them to a corner where a massive radial engine sat on a custom-built stand. "This is a Wright R1820 Cyclone. 9 cylinders, 200 horsepower when it's running right. Came out of a B-17 Flying Fortress that crash-landed in a wheat field in Kansas in 1943. The crew survived, but the engine was written off as a total loss." Natalie approached the engine with reverence, her eyes wide as she took in the complexity of the massive machine. "It's beautiful. It's also completely disassembled," Marcus said. "Every single component needs to be inspected, refurbished, or replaced. The cylinders need to be rebored. The crankshaft needs to be rebalanced. The valves and valve seats need to be completely rebuilt. It's about 6 months of work for an experienced team." "What's wrong with it?" Natalie asked, walking slowly around. "The engine stand." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean, what's wrong with it?" "I just told you. Everything's wrong with it. It's been sitting in pieces for 80 years. "No," Natalie said, her voice taking on the focused tone Lawrence had learned to recognize. "I mean, what caused the original failure? Why did it stop? Running in 1943? Marcus glanced at Lawrence, who shrugged. They both watched as Natalie continued her careful inspection of the disassembled engine, her small hands hovering over various components without actually touching them. "The official report said engine failure due to enemy fire," Marcus replied. "Flak damage to the oil system caused bearing failure and subsequent catastrophic engine seizure." Natalie shook her head. "That's not what happened. Look at the wear. Patterns on the connecting rod bearings. See how the damage is concentrated on the lower half of the bearing surface. That's not oil starvation from combat damage. That's oil contamination. Probably metal particles from a manufacturing defect in the oil pump." Marcus stared at her, then walked over to examine the components she was indicating. After a moment, he let out a low whistle. "Son of a bitch! You're right, I've been looking at this engine for 3 years, and I missed that completely." "The flak damage was real," Natalie continued, "but it happened after the engine was already failing. The pilot probably tried to nurse it home on partial power, but the bearing damage was already too severe. When the flak hit the oil lines, it just accelerated the inevitable." "How did you see that so quickly?" Marcus asked, genuine amazement in his voice. "The metal tells the story if you know how to read it. Dad taught me that failure patterns are like fingerprints. Each type of damage leaves specific marks. Combat damage looks different from mechanical failure, and mechanical failure looks different from maintenance issues." Marcus straightened up, looking at Natalie with new respect. "Lawrence, I think you've got yourself a genuine prodigy here. This kid just diagnosed an 80-year-old engine failure in 30 seconds. She's been doing that since the day I met her," Lawrence replied. "The question is, what do we do with a gift like that?" "We nurture it," Marcus said firmly. "We teach her everything we can, and then we get out of her way and let her teach us." He turned to Natalie. "How would you like to help me rebuild this engine properly this time, addressing the root cause of the original failure?" Natalie's face lit up with the first genuine excitement Lawrence had seen from her since her father's death. "Really? You'd trust me to work on something this important? Kiddo, after what you just showed me, I'd trust you to work on anything. But we do this right. Safety first, proper procedures, no shortcuts. Your father didn't save Lawrence's life just so you could get hurt in my workshop. Dad always said that proper preparation prevents poor performance." Marcus grinned. "Your father was a smart man. All right then, first lesson starts now. The most important tool in any engine rebuild isn't a wrench or a torque meter, it's patience. This engine has been waiting 80 years to run again. It can wait a little longer for us to do the job right." As Marcus began explaining the systematic approach to engine restoration, Lawrence watched Natalie absorb every detail with the intense focus he had come to associate with her mechanical work. But more than that, he saw something he hadn't seen since the day he'd found her in his hangar: pure joy. In the space of an afternoon, surrounded by the voices of sleeping aircraft and the wisdom of an old soldier who had served alongside her father, Natalie Cox had found her calling. And Lawrence realized that in helping her discover her gift, he was finally beginning to understand what Greg Cox had meant when he said that some people were meant to fix things, not just machines, but the broken connections between past and future, between loss and possibility, between what was damaged and what could be made whole again. 6 months later, the Wright R-1820 Cyclone engine roared to life for the first time since 1943, its 9 cylinders firing in perfect sequence as Natalie Cox made minute adjustments to the fuel mixture from her position at the test stand control panel. The sound was magnificent, with 200 horsepower of perfectly balanced mechanical symphony that sent vibrations through the concrete floor and brought tears to Marcus Williams' eyes. "Throttle back to idle," Marcus called over the engine noise, his voice filled with pride and amazement. "Let her settle into a steady rhythm." Natalie's small hands moved confidently over the controls, her ear attuned to every nuance of the engine's voice as she found the perfect idle speed. To Lawrence, who stood watching from the safety area with a set of hearing protectors clamped over his ears, the engine sounded like controlled thunder. But he could see from Natalie's expression that she was hearing something far more complex, a mechanical conversation that revealed the health and happiness of every component. "Oil pressure steady at 65 psi, she called out, reading the gauges with the same ease most kids her age read comic books. "Cylinder head temperatures all within normal range. She's purring like a kitten." Marcus signaled for engine shutdown, and the hangar gradually returned to its normal level of ambient noise as the massive propeller coasted to a stop. In the sudden quiet, Natalie pulled off her own hearing protection and grinned, the first completely uninhibited smile Lawrence had seen from her since the day they'd met. "That," she announced, "was the most beautiful sound I've ever heard." "Kid, you just brought an 80-year-old engine back to life," Marcus said, walking over to shut down the test stand systems. "And not just back to life, back to perfect health. The oil analysis shows zero contamination. Compression readings are identical across all 9 cylinders, and the harmonic balance is better than factory specifications." Lawrence approached the test stand, still awed by what he had just witnessed. "How do you feel?" he asked Natalie. "Like I finally understand what Dad meant when he talked about bringing things back to life," she replied. "It's not just about fixing what's broken. It's about understanding why it broke in the first place and making sure it never happens again." Over the past 6 months, Lawrence had watched Natalie transform from a wary, guarded child into someone who moved through the world with quiet confidence and purpose. The workshop they had built together had become her sanctuary, filled with the tools and projects that fed her mechanical soul. But it was here, in Marcus's hangar, working on engines with histories and stories, that she had truly found herself. "Speaking of bringing things back to life," Marcus said, wiping his oil-stained hands on a shop rag, "I've got something to show you two, something I've been working on as a surprise." He led them to the far corner of the hangar, where a canvas tarp covered something roughly the size of a small aircraft. With theatrical ceremony, Marcus pulled away the covering to reveal a beautifully restored 1946 Piper J3 Cub, its yellow paint gleaming under the hangar lights and its fabric surfaces. Taut and perfect. "She's gorgeous," Natalie breathed, walking around the small aircraft with the same reverent attention she brought to every machine. Continental A65 engine, fabric over steel tube construction, probably cruises at about 75 miles per hour. Incorrect, Marcus confirmed. But here's the thing. This particular Cub has a very special history. She was used as a liaison aircraft in Europe during the war, flew reconnaissance missions behind enemy lines. After the war, she was sold as surplus and spent 60 years crop dusting in Iowa before the owner donated her to a museum. Lawrence could see where this was going, and his throat began to tighten with emotion. The museum couldn't afford the restoration, Marcus continued, so they were going to scrap her for parts. But when I heard her story, I couldn't let that happen. I bought her from the museum and spent the last 2 years bringing her back to flying condition. She's beautiful, Natalie said again. But why are you showing her to us? Marcus exchanged a look with Lawrence, who nodded encouragingly. Because, kiddo, this airplane belonged to your father. The words hit Natalie like a physical blow. She stared at Marcus, then at the small yellow aircraft, her hand moving unconsciously to the dog tags at her throat. What do you mean, belonged? To Dad? Before your father became a medic, he was a pilot, Marcus explained gently. Did you know that? Natalie shook her head, her eyes never leaving the Piper Cub. He flew this exact aircraft on observation missions in Afghanistan, used it to scout terrain for medical evacuations, to spot IEDs on convoy routes, to provide overwatch for ground operations. Your father saved a lot of lives from the cockpit of this little airplane. Lawrence felt tears streaming down his face as he watched Natalie process this revelation. He never told me he was a pilot. Military pilots don't always talk about their flying, especially when they transition to other duties, Marcus said. But I've got his logbooks, his training records, even some photographs of him with this aircraft. Your father wasn't just a medic, Natalie. He was a damn fine pilot too. Natalie walked slowly to the front of the aircraft and placed her small hand on the polished aluminum spinner. Can I sit in it? You can do more than sit in it, Marcus replied. You can learn to fly it. If Lawrence agrees, and if you want to, I'll teach you to fly your father's airplane. The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sound of wind through the hangar's ventilation system. Natalie stood with her hand on the propeller spinner, her eyes closed, as if she were listening to voices that only she could hear. She's been lonely, she said finally. The airplane. She's been waiting for someone who understands her to come back. Airplanes are like that, Marcus agreed. They remember their pilots. This one's been waiting for a Cox to fly her again. Natalie turned to Lawrence, her dark eyes shining with unshed tears. Can I learn to fly Dad's airplane? Lawrence knelt down so he was at her eye level, his own voice thick with emotion. Your father spent his life helping people reach safety. If you want to learn to fly his airplane, to carry on that tradition, then yes. Absolutely yes. There's one more thing, Marcus added. The registration number. November 77. Greg. Charlie. The previous owner had it changed to honor a military pilot who had flown the aircraft in combat. The Greg Charlie stands for Gregory Cox. Natalie began to cry then, not the careful, controlled tears she had shed over the past months, but the deep, cleansing sobs of a child who had finally found a connection to the father she had lost. Lawrence gathered her into his arms, and for the first time since he had known her, she allowed herself to be completely vulnerable, to grieve not just for what she had lost, but for all the things she had never known she had lost. He would be so proud of you, Lawrence whispered into her hair. The engine you just rebuilt, the way you've honored his memory, the person you're becoming, he would be so incredibly proud. When her tears finally subsided, Natalie pulled back and looked at both men with a determination that reminded Lawrence powerfully of her father. I want to fly it. I want to learn everything about it. And someday I want to use it to help people the way Dad did. Marcus smiled and pulled out a worn leather logbook. Then we'd better get started. Your first flying lesson begins with understanding the aircraft's history, its capabilities, and its limitations. Every pilot needs to know their airplane's story before they can add their own chapter to it. As they sat in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the hangar doors, with Natalie's father's airplane gleaming beside them, and the restored right engine cooling in the background, Lawrence realized that they had reached a turning point. Natalie was no longer just the daughter of the man who had saved his life. She was becoming her own person, carrying forward the best of her father's legacy while creating something uniquely her own. The mechanical voices she heard, the gift she had inherited, the skill she was developing, all of it was leading somewhere. And for the first time since that terrible day in Afghanistan, Lawrence began to believe that perhaps the threads of tragedy and loss could be rewoven into something beautiful, something that honored both the dead and the living, something that proved that love and legacy could transcend even death itself.